But we're going to move on now to workplace equality with Peter Vlachos and religious exemptions. So you have the floor.
Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Nathalie, for the invitation and the invitation on behalf of the Central London Humanist Group for hosting this evening's event, which is on such a timely and important topic. Now, first, I need to convey to you the apologies of my fellow council member from the National Secular Society and recently elected Vice President of the Society, Elizabeth O'Casey, who was originally intended to speak this evening. Well, fortunately for her, unfortunately for us, she's in a conference in Montreal at the minute. She's been seconded doing a lot of work in North America, and rather ironically, I'm originally from Canada and I'm here in London speaking to you, so she sends apologies. The structure of the governmental discourse around faith-based issues and packaging, just speaking earlier with one of in the audience out in East London, even holding consultations about the Olympics in a faith-based format, faith in the Olympics. And the emphasis that recent governments have put on structuring public discourse on faith has acted to exclude women from the discussion tables. I know Naomi and I have sat around some of those tables where the NSS may have a vice president who's a woman, and in fact previously our president was a woman, a very outspoken Barbara Smoker. Some of you will know from the movement have been involved, and we'll sit around the table with 20 other representatives, primarily from religions, and they're all male and old and middle class. So by defining questions of public policy in this faith-based format, which, if I can allude to, is sort of an employment-related environment, the way the discourse is actually structured is in itself excluding women in the corridors of power, and I think that needs to be addressed. Ultimately, the answer to the question, what kind of secularism is best for women, will and should be decided by women themselves, individually and collectively. So I'm honored to be able to make a modest contribution, inevitably from a male perspective, to this important discussion. We've been asked to limit our comments to 10 minutes, and I'll try to do that. I usually lecture for 2 hours at a time, so stop. Please stop. But let me start first by laying before you 3 points to consider, and then you can ask the questions. First, for some time now, we've been hearing, especially in the media, the charge of aggressive secularism. Right? Aggressive secularism. Now, this is both untrue and, I would argue, inaccurate. What the media and those Christian commentators are probably referring to is the strongly argued atheist position by the likes of Richard Dawkins and co. We need to bear in mind the distinction between atheism, an understanding of the world and our moral role within it, without reference to the supernatural, and secularism, which is a key component in the legal, political, and social framework of a multiculturally diverse democratic country such as our own, made up of free and equal citizens, women and men. So the charge of aggressive secularism reminds me of the way in which women who stand up for themselves are sometimes branded as aggressive feminists, aggressive women. When men stand up for themselves in the workplace, they're labeled as assertive. So the religious right, and if I can use the euphemism religious right, is threatened, and rightly so. They're probably thinking, why don't those naughty secularists, like those naughty women, just be quiet? Don't they know their place? It's the same kind of tone that we're hearing in the media. Now, secondly, it's no great secret, as Naomi has already well represented, especially amongst the monotheistic religions, that religion has been instrumental in the formation of a global social construct in which women have been effectively relegated to second-class citizen status. Now, this is rooted ultimately in arguments based in biology, where women at best have been told by religious leaders that they are separate but equal. This is what the religious right will say, and this is what amongst the Muslim community people say, oh, women are different, but they're equal. And I would argue, well, no. Women are equal and equal, full stop. Of course, religion has been at the heart and continues to be at the heart of many wars around the world, historically, wars on all sides, in which it's often forgotten in the history books. We hear the stories of the fallen male soldiers and generals, but rarely do we hear of all the suffering that women experience behind the scenes. So secularism, that is a secular political and legal framework, is central in preventing, or at least minimizing, such inequalities from seeping back into society through the religious back door. Which brings me thirdly to the matter of workplace rights and religious exemptions against, in view of the recently relaunched Equalities Act 2010. The new Equalities Act, which came into force on the 1st of October last year, is certainly a positive step in the updating and consolidation of previous equalities legislation, notwithstanding a strong case made by the Secular Society along with our colleagues at the BHA. An exemption, a significant exemption, was allowed for religious organizations to allow them to discriminate in certain areas on the basis of their religious belief. And I want to read out a section, not necessarily from the law, but from the guidance from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, to give you a flavor of the advice that they're giving, and then if we have time later, we could go into the nitty-gritty of the actual legislation. Exceptions for religion or belief organizations. If you are a religion or belief organization, how do we define that? Organization, it could be an organization of 3 people. There are some exceptions to equality law that only apply to the services you provide. Services in this context does not mean religious acts of worship, which are not covered by equality law at all, but something a person or organization does for the public or a section of the public. Religion or belief organizations in certain circumstances, and how's that for vagueness, discriminate because of some protected characteristics in the way they operate. Unlike charities, they do not need a charitable instrument or to meet any particular test to be able to restrict their services. In some situations, religion or belief organizations and people acting on their authority, the imams, Church of England leaders, etc., may restrict or refuse membership to the organization, participation in its activities, the use of any goods, facilities, or services that it provides, and the use of its premises because of a person's religion or belief or their sexual orientation. For example, and this is, again, guidance that this is from the Government's Equalities Office themselves, 2009, I think this was. No, 2010. In line with the Act. For example, a Baptist church was asked by a lesbian and gay support group if they could use its hall for training sessions for new volunteers. The church said that it could not let them use the hall because its doctrine rejects homosexuality and it would cause upset to a significant number of its members. Significant number? How do you measure that? Members. Well, who's counting the members? If it was up to the Catholic Church, 1.5 billion people are members, aren't they? This would not be the advice. This would not be unlawful discrimination. You must not discriminate because of other characteristics such as race or age or disability. However, if your organization exists to practice or teach or advance a particular religion or belief, to provide benefits for people who hold a particular religious belief, you will be able to specify that your users are of a particular sexual orientation. And I can see why the religious right is concerned with the sexual orientation. We've had the cases of the registrar in England who refused the same-sex to provide the wedding ceremony for the same-sex couples. The B&B case where the same-sex couple was refused a public service. Because probably unlike any other challenge, homosexuality strikes at the heart of the traditional role of women. and there's nothing, and it's scaring them like nothing else. It's the last bastion of apartheid. Faith apartheid is okay. In our schools, faith apartheid is okay. In these religious exemptions, faith apartheid is okay. We can't do it for race, we can't do it for ethnicity, we can't do it for age, we can't do it for disability, but we can kowtow to the religious organizations, however they may define themselves. Now this is dangerous. How am I doing for time?
You can take another couple of minutes.
Thank you. This is quite dangerous. I mean, who speaks for these organizations? The Lawyers Christian Fellowship refers to the right to a religious lifestyle in distinction to a gay lifestyle. But it's not about a gay lifestyle. These are, and race, and gender, and disability. These are enshrined equal rights under the UK, EU, and other legislation. So the danger that I see here, now that faith groups are being invited to provide public services, is that they will use their role in providing public services to say, well, we're a Muslim organization, say, and our adherents don't believe that women should drive. So the Meals on Wheels will only have male drivers. Although they should be covered under the Public Service Directive to prevent that. Or we might get into a ludicrous situation where on the 3 days a week that they're doing Meals on Wheels only to Muslim care homes, they can discriminate. But on the 2 days that they're delivering to everyone else, they can't. I mean, how stupid is that? Let alone how unfair it is. So once we start talking about lifestyle, the protection of religious organizations, and study papers funded by the Human Rights Commission themselves, within their own research, starts questioning, does religion have special rights? Does religion? I mean, we fought long and hard to get rid of the blasphemy laws. And 2 years later, we've got a new Equalities Act where we're talking about that religion has exemptions. So we've gone from religious organizations, which are already amorphous, to religion being protected. I mean, it seems like one step forward, two steps back. So 1 minute, last page, I'll time myself. So there's some protection for religious groups who carry out, there's some protection for us from religious groups who carry out government contracts. However, it's not, these scenarios that I painted aren't too far-fetched, I don't think. And now the equalities legislation indicates that such exemption isn't only for genuine occupational requirements such as senior faith leaders. As early as 2006, the Church of England was trying to claim that secretaries and cleaners in schools had to be of a particular faith. I mean, they've been at this exemption game for a long time. Also cause for alarm is I've already covered this bit. So human rights exist quite correctly to protect individuals, not groups. Fortunately, we do not live in a confessional society where different laws apply to individuals depending on one's faith. We've fought hard and long for one law for all. And yet, in an advanced country like the UK, we've left open this backdoor exemption, Section 29, if you want to look it up, in the Human Rights Act, potentially a gaping loophole for self-styled religious organizations, often self-appointed, often male, often conservative, self-appointed spokespeople. I have plenty of examples to share with you if time allows, but if I could leave you with the concluding thought that secularism is not just another belief system, that in some ways, if I can respectfully suggest, humanism has been co-opted by the government as just another faith system, but rather secularism is, or should be, part and parcel of the roots and foundation of our democratic multicultural society, a society based on tolerance, respect, freedom and equality. Secularism is not just another belief system. It is itself the level playing field of democracy. Thank you.
So if we can throw open to the panel for 5 minutes, if you'd like to discuss some of the points that were raised there.
I'm lost for words because my background, I mean, although I've done a lot of research on religion and on religions, mainly on Islam, but I agree with the last paragraph where humanism is not a faith, but it is the basic fundamental...
Secularism.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, well, what I would like to say, I mean, Philip is absolutely right when he said that they could tomorrow come and say, no, we have our own place and nobody is entitled to come in, and that will create more and more separation and segregation in the society. I have seen two experiences of this sort. One of them after the attack of 9/11, where in a very naive way, up to that time, I thought that, you know, all religions are tolerant and understanding and whatever. And I took it upon myself to call Regent Park Mosque. And I said, could we perform a prayer, you know, for the souls of the victims who has died? And whoever answered me at the time, he tried to evade the question, the answer, and said, no, we cannot, and blah, 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 blah. Eventually, after a minute, it wasn't more than that, he said, well, we cannot do it because these are Kafirs. And that where I was totally shocked of this reply, because I was under the impression that whether a church or a synagogue or a mosque or any place is a place of God where everybody should be welcomed and should be treated in a respectful manner, particularly those victims. That was the first time. And the second time recently, when I tried to initiate some kind of a movement from a sense of responsibility, being a privileged woman living in the West, and have changed through the time, you know. So I wanted to initiate, after the attack on the church in Iraq, I wanted to initiate a group of all of us standing together. We stand against terrorism, giving a message to the Arab world that we here in the diaspora, as well as everybody, we stand, you know, against terrorism or in any form and in any place. And again, I was shocked that we couldn't do it in any place. We could not perform it in any place. Eventually, we got some hole, something, and people came. Although one of the known sheikhs in here, he came and he stood and he spoke, but unfortunately, the fact that religious places were closed for such a call really made me more and more.
They were discriminating, which is within their rights under Section 29 of the Equality Act.
Well, you know
it's absolutely legal what they did. Can you believe it? It's absolutely legal.
Would you like to make any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I endorse and I think what's sort of been said, and particularly what Peter was talking about is very close to my heart, because I worked night and day on the bloody equality laws it was going through, and I can still recite parts of it, sadly. You know, it's one thing, we know that religions are discriminatory. It's really disgusting, actually, when the state endorses that and allows that to happen. And just taking it to a more gendered angle, I think, it just reminds me of I don't know if many of you heard of the Jewish free school case, amazingly, which they won, about the admissions for a state-funded Jewish school, where they were actually found by the High Court to be racist, because they were, the admission said that it's about the Jewishness of the mother and the white blood and this kind of stuff, and Jews, you know, who children of converts weren't the right kind of Jew and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, luckily in this country, even though we have lots of religious discrimination, we do have very, very strict laws about race discrimination. They were found to be racist and they stopped doing that. But as the case unravels, I mean, and it was a really fantastic victory, but as the case unravels, there were a number of families sort of who actually sort of took part in it. And we found out the details of the kinds of tests about the eligibility requirements of getting into the state-funded school. And one of the mothers of the child who'd gone through, who actually taught at the school, I believe, but who had converted in Israel 20 years before and had lived actually quite an orthodox kind of life, to see whether her son was able to get into this state-funded school, she had to go to the office of the chief rabbi, where they asked her about her kind of conversion. Was she menstruating when she went through the conversion? Was she doing all this kind of stuff? They were asking these questions of a woman to see whether her child was able to get a state education in this country in like 2008. And it's those kind of things which are permitted by law, which are absolutely disgusting, and that kind of case really highlighted. I was actually really shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, because there were some sorts of things, you know, do you go to church on a Sunday? Do you do these kind of things? But actually, the kinds of practices that are run by different types of school are really not very well monitored, and they're really, really outrageous.
All right. Thank you very much. That was a really interesting area. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes. Yeah, you went first. Go for it.
Am I too extreme in thinking that if a school is paid for by the state, even if partially, then everybody should be allowed to participate in the school?
It's an excellent example of, we call it more arrogance. Moral arrogance, those people who tell you, how can you have a morality, you don't have a religion? And then they turn around and say that we're aggressive secularists.
Yeah.
The arrogance to say that you can't tell right from wrong because you don't believe in God. The faith schools, I mean, we could go on for hours with faith schools. What if one has a Muslim child and the only two options are a Church of England primary school or a Catholic primary school? Where does the child go? A more serious problem that we're trying to highlight in the National Secular Society is the fact that in some communities there is no longer any choice. You don't have a choice as a taxpayer. Your only choice for your children is this religious school or that religious school, because the closest non-religious state school is 60 miles away. And that's a case that we're pursuing as a kind of a human rights case. We don't spend so much time on policy. We tend to try to get the legal cases going. I've left some leaflets, just the front page of our recent bulletin. We've got a high court case, we're trying to launch a high court case to stop prayers in councils, in town local authorities. I mean, you'll be surprised. More than half of the local government council chambers start their proceedings with a prayer. Yeah, look at your face. Yeah, exactly. More than half. We've done the research. More than half. So we're taking that as an employment case when one councillor has given up. He's saying, I'm not going to apply again because I don't want to sit there and pray. I shouldn't have to.
What kind of prayer is it? Would it be neutral?
No, sometimes, very often it's a Christian prayer. Occasionally it's a kind of a multi-faith type prayer, rare. I mean, the crazy situation, of course, would be that we'd have to do rotating prayers. So we'd have a Jewish prayer, then a pagan prayer, and then the Star Trek Jedi prayer. And sign your census on.
Animal sacrifice.
Yes, animal sacrifice. So what do? You sit there. Some councils have argued in Brighton, some of our researchers in Brighton have taken up the charge with the council, and they're trying to get around it because they say the Lord Mayor comes in, they have the prayer, then the Mayor steps out, and then steps back in to start the meeting. And they say because there's a 30-second break, that there's been no discrimination. But the non-religious councillors are saying, well, what, am I supposed to stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down? And it's just not fair. Let alone the other people, other representatives and employees of other faiths who don't particularly want to sit through a Christian prayer. Tower Hamlets advised at a council, I don't know if it was a staff meeting or a council meeting, during Ramadan, for everyone not to eat the sandwiches until 6:15, out of respect to the others who were fasting.
I think we could probably have a debate on this for hours.
Yeah. Rather than just have another room with sandwiches for those who are coming late, but they would ask that everyone adhere to that. It goes on in